Hi guys, it's Spencer. Welcome to Sphinx Reads. Today I'll be doing my 2021 TBR Challenge wrap-up. If you guys haven't seen my 2021 TBR Challenge video yet, I'll have that link down below as well as in the cards. This challenge was created by KITE from our Goodreads group Middle Grade Madness. Each of the prompts in this challenge kind of recognizes or references something that happened in 2020, and today I'll kind of wrap up everything that I've read for each of those prompts. The first prompt was the 46th book on your TBR shelf. And that is in honor of the inauguration of the 46th President of the United States, which is President Joe Biden. For this one, I read The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. It's a very popular book. It's considered, I think, a classic, and it's essentially a diary of Anne Frank, who is a Jewish girl who was living during the time of World War II, and her diary ends right when the Nazis captured her and her family. Well, I am glad that I read this book because, Anne Frank, even though she was really young, she was smart for her age, I think. She had all of these very progressive ideas, which I really liked. She was also still very young, so she had all of these, concerns that, I kind of got annoyed by a little bit. Like, for example, her, deep hatred for her parents and her obsessions over boys and things like that. But I really appreciated just how raw Anne Frank writes and how very honest and how very blunt she is. I love her personality, even though she's a little bit annoying. I think much of the heartbreak that I got from this book was just seeing the humanity in Anne Frank. And honestly, while it does touch on, what was going on and how the Jews were being treated, it's still not the main focus of Anne's diary. And that's the part that I really love, because we get to see how much these people, they were real people with real lives, and they were more than how other people saw them. And so to have the diary end right where that humanity is not recognized, that was just a really powerful ending for me. I really appreciated this read because this is something that I never would have read, I feel like, unless it was for a prompt. I do think that this is an important piece of literature, which kind of explains why it's so popular. It's just that nonfiction is not really something that I usually reach for. The next prompt was a book with a red cover, and this is in remembrance of the Australian wildfires. The book that I read for this prompt is actually kind of fitting with the fire theme, and that is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is another classic. I feel like it's kind of a dystopian, I would say, or a sci-fi dystopian kind of story. A lot of you may already be familiar with it. Maybe it's been required reading for you in school. But Fahrenheit 451 is the story of a guy named Montag, I believe, who is living in this dystopian world where books are banned. Books are actually burned. Information is being controlled, everything is monitored by the government, and then one day when, as a result of a series of events, Montag has the opportunity to actually read a book, which is kind of illegal, I think, in this setting. That spirals into a lot of chaotic events, which brings up a lot of really interesting themes about censorship and things like that. I really love this book. If you've watched some of my previous videos, I've talked about it a little bit. This was a surprise because I went into this thinking that this was a classic, so I'll just have to trudge through it and kind of appreciate the themes that were going to be explored. But the language, the writing is actually very accessible, and I read it almost like a modern book. Granted, this is, I think, considered a modern classic, so it's not that hard to read. The language isn't too old for me. Highly recommend this. This was an absolute page turner. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm looking forward to reading more from Ray Bradbury. The next prompt was a book written by an African-American author, and this is in honor of the Black Lives Matter movement. The book that I read for this is kind of fitting for the theme of this prompt, and I read The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This is also a very popular book. So this is about a girl named Star Carter who witnessed the murder of her best friend Khalil at the hands of a white cop. This was really heartbreaking to read. This was, even though this is fiction, it felt like it was nonfiction because it does really reflect very well and the situation of racism in America as well as police brutality, and I love that we get to explore the event not just through the eyes of our main character Star, but also through the eyes of many of the other characters. We have characters who are outright racist, and we have other characters who are racist because of the microaggressions that they display. We have a black cop also involved, and so the nuances of police brutality and racism in America were explored so expertly, and Angie Thomas's writing is something to look out for. The story is really well written, and I enjoyed kind of exploring all of our characters and how just human they are. The next prompt is a book with a major character that has a life-threatening disease or illness, and this is in remembrance of those who have unfortunately didn't survive COVID-19 and looking at the impact the virus had on our lives and the world. For this one, I picked something that's a little bit more out of my comfort zone. I picked a romance book, and that is A Walk to Remember by Nicholas Sparks. This is, I feel like, a fairly old book. Not like classic old, but this was like old. This was like my parents' time when this was released. And I believe the movie is pretty popular. Since this is from the romance genre, which I don't really reach for, and I was just doing this to kind of broaden my horizons and explore other genres, I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did, and I really, really loved this story. In this story, we follow our main character. Just like in the other video, I can't remember who the main character is. I should have done my research. But the main character is a guy, and he is in high school. He has not made the smartest of decisions, and he ends up having to work in a play that was written by a pastor, and he has to work with the pastor's daughter as his kind of love interest in the story. That honestly is just a little bit of what the story actually is, and I feel like it doesn't really do justice of how good this story was, or at least how much I enjoyed it and how much emotional impact it had on me. It being a romance, yes, there were some cheesy moments, but also everything just felt sincere. Everything just felt to my taste. It was perfect. I listened to this on audiobook, and I remember just like reaching kind of like a turning point in the story and just like almost like sobbing because of how much like that particular scene just like hit me. I'm really glad that this worked out for me because now I'm a little bit more comfortable exploring more books from the romance genre, as well as exploring more of Nicholas Sparks' works. The next prompt is a book that belongs to the contemporary genre, and that is because the Pantone color of 2020 is classic blue, which is a calming color that also represents the unknown. For this one, I picked Waiting for Fits by Spencer Hyde, and I've talked about this before, but this was one of my most disappointing reads of the year 2021, this year. In this story, we follow our main character. I don't remember her main character's name, but she has very severe OCD and has to go into a mental health facility for it. And in this facility, she makes a bunch of friends, particularly a guy named Fitz who has schizophrenia. I really didn't like this book. I thought the writing was terrible. In my opinion, also, I think the mental health representation was not the best. I do want to make a disclaimer though, because I kind of talked trash about this book in a previous video, but I do know that the author himself has OCD and kind of reflected his own personality and his own experiences on the main character, even though the character was a girl and the author is a guy. He actually had a note at the beginning of the book that he kind of wrote all these characters whom the girl makes friends with at this facility based on actual people he knew. So him saying that almost felt like, it made me feel bad because I really did feel that the mental health representation was not the best, and him saying that it was actually like to the best of his ability from people he actually knew. I feel kind of bad saying that, but I just personally feel the way the characters were written were in such a way, particularly the main character as well as the love interest Fitz, I feel like they were written in such a way that there was no way that I could attach myself to them and could love them as characters. In fact, I hated both of them. I hated our main character particularly. The book is written in first person, and it was just really annoying to be staying in the main character's head. And the way that she expresses herself is just really odd and really weird. The worst thing about this book that I didn't like was the interjections that the main character makes in conversations as well as in the actual like writing, where she would say something that's like super snarky and she would think that she's like super cool and witty, and she'd be like, yeah, whatever. Like literally the word whatever appears so many times in the book, and it was so annoying. It got to me so bad. I don't want to dwell on this book any longer because honestly just the memory of it just like gives me a headache. The next prompt is a book set during a war, and this is commiserating many wars that occurred around the world. And so for this one, like I said in my video, I wasn't sure what to pick, so I like went through everything on my TBR and looked for something that has the word war in it. The one that I picked was The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini, because this is set in a civil war in Afghanistan, I believe. And this is one of those books. I was actually planning to make like a full-on like review for this book, but I decided not to. But I do have a lot of thoughts on this book, even though I do see the literary merit in why this is such a popular book and why so many people love it. Like the writing is just exceptionally good. I guess I should talk about what this book is about. So this book follows our main character. Wow, I also don't know the name of our main character. I guess you could just read and find out. It's the story of a main character and his best friend, whose name is Hassan. Hassan is more memorable than the main character in my opinion. And just like their life as kids and them growing up. That's like super big, but that's really what the story's about. It's about their life and how they survived a war and just like a bunch of terrible things. This is a book that I feel like you just have to read and find out like what happens. However, I will say that you need to check the trigger warnings for this book. That was actually a mistake that I made. I did not check the trigger warnings for this book. And if you guys know me, I have trouble DNFing, and so when I start a book, this against all odds, I'll try my best to not DNF the book. And this is part of the reason why I do regret reading this book. There's a lot of literary merit to it. I loved the main character's best friend, Hassan, and just like Hassan has to be one of my favorite characters of all time. But this book, the writing was so good. Like, let me make that clear. It's perfect. The story itself is very moving. It's very thought-provoking. It's very emotional and heart-wrenching. The reason that I regret reading this is how much like of a trigger, or many triggers actually, this caused in me. Because there were certain scenes, there were a lot of scenes actually, that were very triggering, they were very descriptive and visual, and it was just painful to watch and witness and just read about. And it didn't necessarily put me in a reading slump, because I'm the kind of person who, like, after I finish a book, I read the next one immediately. But it did, like, affect me emotionally, that I was, like, thinking about this book for so many days afterwards. And so overall, I do appreciate how good this book is and how well written it is. But I just did not care for all of the triggers that were in this book. Okay, the next prompt is a book set in Europe, and this is to accept the end of Brexit and the UK officially leaving EU with or without a deal. For this one, I read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is another classic, it's very popular. I'm not going to talk about what this book is about because everyone, I think, knows about it except for me, because I went into this completely blind. This is another book that didn't really work for me. I don't know if I was just like generally disinterested in the story. I read this in ebook as well as an audiobook, and whatever format I tried, whether it's like listening to it or reading it on my phone or doing both, it just didn't work for me. I was just not interested at all in the story. I did read this alongside, or not at the same time, but around the same time that I was watching the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is kind of a modern adaptation composed of like very short videos in a series on YouTube. You can go look that up. I'll leave a link in the description below as well. And I enjoyed that a lot, but just the book, I did not enjoy. The next prompt is a book in which the main character plays a sport, and this is making up for the postponement of the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, which by the time you're watching this has already happened. Go Philippines! I'm so proud of Heidelin Diaz and everyone else who participated and won. So proud of them. Anyway, so the book that I picked for this is a middle grade book, which I love middle grade so much, and this is We Dream of Space by Erin Entrada Kelly, who is a Filipino-American author. In this book, we follow three siblings. They're all in the same grade at school, one because he was held back a year, and the other two because they're twins. All have different interests and different personalities, but I really loved all of them. We followed them as kind of navigate the troubles and trials of middle school, leading up to the Challenger disaster. I loved following these kids so much. The beginning of the story is kind of slow going. Like I don't think I was really even that interested until I reached like the halfway mark. But from then on, like getting to know these kids more and like the things that they're going through, and just they're just like so pure and so, I just want to adopt these kids. They're so like precious and so sweet. I really enjoyed this story, and because of this was my first Erin Entrada Kelly book. Because of this, I'm going to read definitely more of Erin Entrada Kelly's work. I love her writing. It's very atmospheric and it had kind of like a calming vibe to it that I can just imagine like reading this story like in a raining day and just like being soothed by how like immersive and atmospheric Erin Entrada Kelly's writing is. The next prompt is a poetry book or a book written as a novel in verse, because the Oxford Dictionary announced that this year they've chosen multiple words of the year to reflect an unprecedented year. The one that I picked for this is Memories by Lang Leah. This is a collection of poems and I don't know what else to say about it. It's a collection of poems mainly reflecting on like love and love lost and things like that. There's a lot of jokes about how Lang Liav's like writing style is easy to mimic, and it's kind of like too simple. It's not really art, but I genuinely like enjoyed her poems. I love the way she writes. I love some of the poems in this collection. Not all of them like really were to my taste, but a good chunk of them were. I also read for this prompt The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and this is a pretty well-loved book, especially here in Booktube, but even though I did like some aspects of the story, I loved kind of the rhythm of like how the verses are structured. I felt that it ended a little too abruptly, and we didn't get to see much development from the main character as much as I wanted to. I gave it, I think, 3 stars, which is kind of an unpopular opinion. I think it just didn't hit me as much as I anticipated it would. And finally, we have a middle grade book celebrating the group, the Middle Grade Madness group, reaching 400 members. And for this one, I picked The Magician's Elephant by KITE DiCamillo. This is another book that kind of felt like middle of the road for me. I didn't necessarily love it, but I didn't hate it. I consider KITE DiCamillo as one of my favorite authors, even though I've only read Because of Winn-Dixie and The Tiger Rising prior to this. I loved Because of Winn-Dixie. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And The Tiger Rising didn't work for me, but I still appreciated KITE DiCamillo's writing in it. I felt like this book was kind of in the middle, where the story was good, it was okay, it wasn't too crazy, it wasn't something that I reach for or reread. I can't really talk about what this book is about. We follow a little boy and an elephant, but beyond that, I think everything else is kind of spoilers. What was consistent with my feelings on this book, as well as KITE DiCamillo's other books, was just how much I love the writing. It's very atmospheric. DiCamillo writes in such a way that it lets you feel the emotions that the main characters are experiencing. It like touches on them so delicately that almost feels surrounded by the story that she is kind of creating. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I would describe it best. And that is it for my 2021 TBR Challenge wrap-up. I hope you guys liked this video. Let me know in the comments what you've read so far this year that you liked or were disappointed by. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please forget to subscribe so that you can do it later, and have a good day.